Well, good evening. I now call to order the June 1st, 2020 York County School Board special meeting, our work session for June. The end of the school year is quickly approaching, and I think we all agree this has been a year like none other, full of many new unusual challenges. And on behalf of the board, I would like to recognize the dedication of Dr. Shandor and his leadership team, along with the staff, teachers, students, and the parents who have shown perseverance and commitment to stay the course during this journey that we've been thrust upon. We're very proud of our seniors and applaud their amazing resilience as they head to the finish line here shortly. So now, as we get our virtual meeting started, I'll begin with our roll call for board members. So board members will now state their remote locations. So we'll start with Mr. Higginbotham.
Yes, Brett Higginbotham, District 2 at 111 Ivy Arch, Yorktown, Virginia 23693.
Thank you. Mrs. Geralds?
Yes, Laurel Garrelts, District 3, 100 Leanne Court, Yorktown, Virginia 23692.
Thank you. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes, Mark Schaefer, District 1, 115 Catawba Court, Williamsburg, Virginia 23185.
Thank you. Mr. Myatt?
John Myatt, District 5, 105 Kiskiak Turn 23693.
And James Richardson, District 4, from 710 Ship Point Road, Yorktown, Virginia 23692. So all board members are participating in this special meeting remotely through electronic communications pursuant to our resolution 20-19 authorizing board meetings through electronic communication without a physically assembled quorum and in compliance with York County Ordinance 20-11 during the pendency of Ordinance 20-11 and the COVID-19 pandemic emergency. We are streaming live video of our special meeting through the Division YouTube channel, NYCSD TV. I'd like to also mention that our meeting agenda and documents are available by logging onto Board Docs by way of our YCSD website and yorkcountyschools.org. So next, we're going to move into an action item that we need to consider, consideration of approval of Resolution 20-20 to continue the salaries of members of the York County School Board of York County. And I'm just going to review the process that we followed relating to this resolution. So a legal advertisement sharing information about the public hearing process was published in the Daily Press on April the 28th and May the 8th. The resolution also was posted on Board Docs for public viewing, and the resolution stated, a resolution to continue the salaries of members of the York County School Board at the sum of $9,000 per annum, plus an additional salary of $1,200 for the board chairman, and an additional sum of $600 for the board vice chair effective July 1st, 2020. This reauthorization of the board's salary amounts is pursuant to Code of Virginia 15.2-1414.3. There has been no increase to the salaries of board members of the school board for York County, Virginia since 2005, and none is proposed in the 2021 fiscal year. As a request for public comments was solicited by electronic means in advance of the final board action for the resolution on June the 1st, 2020. And the instructions stated that any person wishing to be heard concerning this matter should email the clerk of the board at sford@ycsd.york.va.us between May 18th, 2020 and May 24th, 2020. And all public comments would be provided to the board members prior to action taken and made part of the record. And just to let all the board members know that no comments were received during this resolution. So is there a motion and a second to approve the resolution 2020 to continue the salaries of the members of the York County School Board?
I move that we approve the resolution 2020 to continue the salaries of members of the York County School Board.
Thank you, Ms. Gerald. So is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Ms. Ford?
Yes, the motion was made by Mrs. Garrelts and seconded by Mr. Schaefer to approve Resolution 2020. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mr. Myatt?
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes.
Mrs. Garrelts?
Yes.
And Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
The motion was passed 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Next, we have consideration of approval of Resolution 20-29, a resolution authorizing specific procurement. So, Dr. Shandor, do you have information to share on this?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Good evening, board members. Mr. Bowen is going to come on and he's going to provide 3 points of information related to this resolution. Mr. Bowen?
Thank you, Dr. Shandor, Mr. Richardson, members of the board. This evening, we have one resolution. There's 3 items on the resolutions that require your approval. The first is additional iPads for our one-to-one initiative. You'll recall in the discussions earlier that as we were assessing our inventory across the school division, we had to go back and revise our number. So we need to purchase an additional $500,000 worth of iPads. This is going to be covered, though, through the current year's state technology grant. So we have funding in the current budget that's going to cover this cost. We also are adding nimble storage systems for Tab High School and the school board office. These are the locations of the servers. However, these servers serve the entire school division. This is the 5-year replacement, and we needed to get this on the resolution so we could go ahead and get this ordered for summer work. And then we went ahead and threw this one on here too. This was just to extend the 1-year warranty for storage at our elementary schools. So each of our schools, while we have servers that handle the main storage, most of our schools have some capability for some minor or minimal storage. And so we're extending the warranty 1 year at a cost of $60,000. And we're going to assess the need to continue this in the future with our one-to-one initiative. So it could be that the $60,000 on the extension is going to save us $600,000 next year in eliminating storage that we would have to renew next year. So those are the 3 items this evening for your approval.
Hey, are there any questions? Okay, hearing no questions, is there a motion and a second to approve Resolution 20-29 authorizing the specific procurement?
I move to approve Resolution 20-29, resolution authorizing specific procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, thank you, Mr. Myatt, for that second. Ms. Ford, if you would poll the board, please.
Yes. A motion is made by Mr. Higginbotham and seconded by Mr. Myatt to approve resolution 20-29. Mrs. Geralt,
Yes.
Mr. Myatt,
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham,
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer,
Yes.
and Mr. Richardson.
Yes.
The motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Now we have several presentations on our agenda. The first one is a strategic plan update, goal 4 of objective 4.1, family engagement. Dr. Shandor, would you please share additional information?
I would like to, Mr. Richardson. If I could, I would like to add just a few comments before we get into presentations, if that's okay with the board.
I have no problem. Is it okay with the rest of the board?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to remind the board that Mr. Bowen, Dr. Carroll, and Ms. Skinner and I will be presenting tomorrow evening at the Board of Supervisors meeting. We're going to cover topics that we've covered with the board on many occasions. The first one would be the one-to-one initiative, and you're going to receive an update on that this evening from Dr. Carroll and Mr. Bowen. We're also going to share a little bit about the Technology Reserve Fund that you approved I think a few weeks ago. We're also going to discuss with them the transfer of impact aid funds and the CARES Act funding that was provided to us from Mr. Morgan in the county. So the CARES money from the county. And finally, we're going to provide a brief update to them on the FY20, the FY21, and the CIP. So we have a number of items that we're going to get through to them and communicate a lot of our plans and be available to answer any questions that they may have. So any questions about that? Okay, hearing none. Then I'd like to quickly ask Mr. Bowen if he'll come back on the screen. We have 2 items related to the budget that we wanted to share this evening. One around the lottery update funds and the food service fund balance. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowen.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor, Mr. Richardson, members of the board. You'll recall in the May work session, I provided you with an update of our funds for FY20. Some of the information that we were receiving from the state superintendent about state sales tax, about lottery dollars. And then I just provided an update on all of our funds. And one of those funds I talked about was food service, because I was concerned at the balance at that time. It was about $700,000. And with the loss of really food service operations, I was afraid and concerned that we might have to use operational dollars to shore up that the food service fund, and we haven't had to do that. We have a very robust food service program, and it maintains a fund balance of about $1 million to $1.3 million. So my staff has been working very diligently as with Mrs. Parr. They're doing a great job with food service. I'll tell you, the one thing that has saved us here is the fact that we have a contracted food service. And it's unfortunate though, with the contracted food service, as the school shut down, most of those employees were furloughed and they weren't getting paid. And that's really helped us in our food service balance. It looks like right now that we're going to end in the fiscal year about our normal fund balance, somewhere between $1.2, $1.3 million. So that was good news. Unfortunately, it does come at the cost of folks who are working for us, folks that we cherish and folks that we work with on a daily basis. And that's unfortunate. But I will tell you, those folks that have food service on in-house, what I'm hearing from my finance directors across the state is that they're struggling to end the year on a positive note with their funds food service balances. So really, this was really the saving, I think, saving grace to our food service balance. The other thing I want to touch on is not sales tax, because sales tax is still in limbo. We'll receive the June sales tax will be for April. And then the May sales tax we'll receive in July, and we accrue that July payment back to the fiscal year. We're still a couple of $1 million, or what we're expecting to receive. But until we see the June payment for April, we really don't know what the impact is going to be. So I don't want to talk too much about sales tax, but we did get our final payment for lottery on Friday. And as I mentioned in May, I had set aside $795,000. I just kind of took it off the top of the revenue for that supplemental per pupil lottery allocation. And so I actually set aside too much. So instead of 795, it was we received 550. So I'm adding back 245,000 because I took 245,000 too much off the revenue. So that's some good news. I'm hoping that we can be able to do the same thing with sales tax, and that we have over projected as a loss. But we'll know probably close to the end of June where we stand with sales tax.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
Thank you.
Well, finally, some good news.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So next, we're going to move into our presentations, our strategic plan update, goal 4, objective 4.1, family engagement. Dr. Shandor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Now I'm going to introduce Ms. Cheryl Parr, Associate Director of School Administration, who's going to provide this evening's update on family engagement. Ms. Parr.
Good evening, Mr. Richardson, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor. Tonight, I will provide a strategic plan update on Goal 4, school culture, specifically addressing the area of family engagement. Our current strategic plan objective for family engagement closely partners with the school culture objectives that Dr. Butler reviewed for you last month. Those objectives focus on fostering respect for families of diverse cultures. The objective you see here required each school to include a family engagement plan in this year's school improvement plans. Because of our mandated closure, in some cases, schools were unable to fully implement these as written, but we have definitely used family connections made during the first semester to carry us through this time. By following the steps you see here, last year we began expanding what we already had in place for involving families in our schools. By studying current research regarding successful strategies, we conducted professional development for all staff. We also established the YCSD Family Engagement Committee, focusing on moving from family involvement to family engagement, and then began planning for the inclusion of goals in school improvement plans. I will now provide additional information on what we have accomplished thus far for each of these steps. Last school year, we began learning about current framework research from the Virginia Tiered Systems of Supports, or VTSS, regarding how we can increase family engagement. Involving families as equal partners is a key component of this research. This school year, many schools started using the VTSS Family Engagement Roadmap tool, which you see here, which is a planning document for projects and activities. I'm pleased to share that this year, a YCSD team began participating in the William & Mary School University Research Network, or CERN, Family Engagement Academy. The Academy involves 4 day-long interactive workshops and includes personalized coaching, resulting in the development of a division engagement plan by June of 2021. Our team has already benefited from information learned from experts in the field through the Academy. Family engagement professional development experiences began in 2018-2019. A trainer from the state VTSS team met with school teams from every building. Information was shared at administrative meetings throughout the second semester. Family engagement committee members also attended VTSS trainings. This school year, information sharing continued at Leadership Academy and administrative meetings, and school-based administrators also provided information to their school staffs. One of the most important things we have learned so far about family engagement is that the end goal for partnering together is the promotion of our students' learning and development. Moving forward, we know that a key practice for every family engagement initiative will be to link that initiative to student learning. Using what we have learned, we've already started focusing on the difference between parent involvement and family engagement. We have a responsibility to ensure that our efforts to partner with families engages them in ways they can all participate. Keeping a focus on this concept will be important for our next steps next year. A family engagement committee was established last school year and met during the first semester of this year as well. The committee includes parents, teachers, counselors, administrators, and school board office staff, which represent all attendance zones and school levels. The purpose of the committee is to develop a framework regarding what the York County School Division values and what components of family engagement are important to us. The committee has already started reviewing how we can expand our current YCSD parent and family engagement policy by aligning these tenets of the policy with current research. Unfortunately, our mandated closure has somewhat impacted the committee's next steps, but we will be able to use information from working with families during this time to better address how to engage with them. As I shared earlier, each school included a family engagement objective in this year's school improvement plans. What you see here is a couple of examples from both the elementary and secondary levels. Expanding awareness of academic expectations is important, as is getting information from families. Before our closure, schools from each level reached out to families in creative ways to get their input for how we can best partner with them. This may have been through surveys or protocols at events families were already attending. Moving forward, it will be important for us to continue to seek input, whether it is in person or virtually. Throughout the presentation, I've referred to how our current mandated closure situation has impacted us. We are now partnering with families in ways we never imagined before, such as providing student meals through a pickup process or home delivery, or involving parents on a committee on the best way to accomplish graduation. We have also provided focused information from both our schools and the division about topics that are important to families and how they can best support their students during this time. Thank you for this opportunity to provide an update about the family engagement objective for Goal 4 of our strategic plan. I'm happy to now answer any questions you may have.
Any members have questions?
You mentioned that information that you're gathering during this time is going to, dictate kind of how you move forward, or I guess best practices. How are you gathering that information? Just talking to staff?
Talking to staff, absolutely, and what roadblocks they may be coming up against as far as getting parent participation or student participation in certain things. And we really are just trying to keep that information close so that we can use that as we go forward to build those best practices that you referred to.
I'm sure that we're learning a lot.
Definitely.
It's a lot to keep up with because this family engagement was started 2 years ago. Was
Yes,
that
sir.
this part?
Yes, sir.
So it's been a lot of work ongoing, and of course with the pandemic, it's kind of put the brakes on a little bit of it, slowed it down somewhat, but I'm sure it'll pick back up soon. So
That's our goal.
good, good. Well, thank you, Ms. Parr, for that update. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to let Dr. Shandor introduce the next presenter. He'll share information relating to the 2020 through 2021 student handbook.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I also want to extend my appreciation for Ms. Parr and the work that she's done with the committee related to family engagement, and also pass on a thank you to all of our staff members. You know, sometimes when you go through really difficult circumstances, there's a lot of good that comes out of it on the other side. And I think that this situation has provided many, many opportunities for our staff members and our families. Although this has been very difficult for everyone, we've also had a chance to rally together to support each other. You know, just if you follow some of our teachers on Twitter, you can see the home visits that they're doing. We have a lot of special ed teachers making numerous trips to homes. Having 3 kids myself, so I'm experiencing the elementary experience, so to speak, middle school, which is difficult, and then high school. But it's really a great example of watching our teachers reach out to our students. If your kids don't do an assignment or they fall behind a little bit or they're struggling, there's a number of examples of teachers reaching back out to families just to ask, hey, how can we help? How can we, you know, is there a different time that may work for you during the day? We understand the troubles of managing, you know, again, with multiple children at home and parents who are trying to work. So kudos to our entire team for the work they're doing with engaging our families. So with that said, I'll move on to item B under presentations, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Aaron Butler, Director of School Administration. He's going to provide us an overview. This is something that we do every year related to proposed revisions, modifications, deletions, and additions to the 2020-2021 Student Handbook Conduct Code. I'll turn it over to Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Mr. Richardson and members of the school board, thank you for this opportunity to present updates and revisions to the 2020-2021 Student Handbook and Code of Conduct. Per the Code of Virginia and York County School Division Policy, JFC, standards for student conduct and a copy of the compulsory attendance law must be provided to all public school parents within 1 calendar month of the opening of school. While not required by state law, our school division annually provides families with information concerning academic, operational, and financial practices, along with other related policies. It is important that parents and students review the student handbook annually to ensure that they are aware of important information concerning testing, behavior expectations, academics, and division procedures. To give a little context and background, the Code of Conduct, which is required by law, was first authorized back in 1994 when the General Assembly tasked the Virginia Board of Education with providing every school division with some guidelines for how we could have a uniform set of expectations across the state. There was a major revision that occurred back in 2004 where they tried to incorporate several of the federal and state laws about student safety and conduct, as well as some case law when it came to best practices for students and school divisions. Back in 2019, I had the opportunity to represent our school division and our region for Region 2, which is the Tidewater area, on the state committee to look at how can we make some recommendations to the Board of Education to revise the Code of Conduct. And so what was developed and what the Board of Education approved was this new model guidance for positive and preventative student conduct and alternatives to suspension. And so this is something that as we move forward, it will be replacing the Discipline, Crime, and Violence Report, which will be retired this year, and replacing it with more instructional, prevention-based approach to discipline, which focuses on equity, fairness, and continuous improvement for students, called the Student Behavior and Administrative Response Report, or SBAR. And you can see a sample here. So rather than being linked to like a violation of the criminal code, it's more based on behavior. So now we will look at behaviors that impede student progress, students that cause a safety issue in schools, and it's divided by elementary versus secondary. because you can look in our current book, you can notice that there are certain codes which for elementary kindergarten parent to see assault and battery looks a little different than some students at the high school level that engage in similar behavior. So those are some of the changes you'll be seeing coming up, and you'll see some of that incorporated into our new handbook. Again, these changes will not take into effect until the 2021-2022 school year. So tonight, as I go through the presentation, it's broken into three main parts. One is editorial revisions that had no substantial change. There's a section that will look at content revisions for alignment, and also content revisions that are substantial change to our current instructional or operational policy. And then finally, any revisions that had to comply with state or federal laws. So in this first part for editorial revisions, you'll notice that there's certain changes we make every year, and I've listed those there for you. And that's typically just for our times and dates, for example, changing from 2019 to 2020 to 2020, 2021. On this next slide, we have a few editorial changes. Again, not anything that changed the content, but just there was some formatting and font changes that had to be made to align with the new book. We also had to update a few websites. And so for our gifted education, there was a website update, and then there was a grammatical change for our English learners to make sure that our tense matched with the noun that was being used to describe that group. On pages 32 and 33, there was some additional, there was some new websites that were added for the SAT and ACT, so that information was updated. And then we had to delete some information about testing just because that information is not provided until later in the summer. And so that information will come out in a different format rather than being in the book. We annually have to update information about International Baccalaureate Diploma Program examination schedule. And then there was a few things with some dates and times that had to be changed for that section. On page 40, we had to update the chart for a Virginia diploma requirement. And that was not a major change. It was just to mirror our written narrative that we had already placed in the handbook. Something that's always important is on page 47 to make sure we have the current school board members who are on the board. And so we did have to make some changes to update that information for this current school board. On page 58, in the back of our book, there's a table of offenses and range of consequences. And if you've noticed in the book that we currently have for this school year, there were a few areas where there were extra bullets. The tables were not aligned, and there was a couple of things that had happened. So when we were trying to convert it into a PDF to submit it for print, there was some errors that happened that we did not catch. It wasn't on our end, but it went when it went to the printer. So we had to take some time this year to fix those so that for next year, you won't see those formatting errors, but that has been corrected for next school year. So I'll pause to see if there's any questions for this particular section before moving on to the next component. Okay, seeing none, I will move on. So for content revisions for alignment, on page 11, for grading, our kindergarten students have been utilizing a standards-based report card approach to grading. And so while we have been doing it this year, this change happened after the handbook was printed. So that was just a change. So it's not a change that something for next year. It's just to reflect in the handbook, something that we are currently doing at this present time. On pages 17 through 20, and I'm going to address this a little later in the presentation, but we had to do some updates to the AUP or acceptable use policy for our internet, just to align that now that we have students learning at home, some of our same guidelines apply not just here at school, but also at home. So we had to add language there to reflect that. And then also on page 31, the Iowa test of basic skills is something that is administered at the elementary school level. We just had to delete the ITBS. We normally use that, but they no longer go by those initials. So we just made that deletion. On page 32, I had already mentioned the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program. There are certain programs that have been consolidated, or we no longer teach those courses, or they've been renamed. And so if you look on that page, you'll see that there have been some revisions there to eliminate a few of the ones that we are no longer using and to add those that we are now currently using. On page 36, there were some additions and deletions to the mathematics language. We tried to make sure that the language there aligns with our New York County math model and the standards of Virginia when it comes to math expectations. Similarly, for English and reading, there was just some word changes. We had to delete some words there so it more aligns with our York County literacy model. On page 37, that is again a companion to what we had talked about, the AAUP policy for social networking and use of web resources. We had to change the language there to also reflect that students are now using their electronic devices at home for instruction. So we had to make some changes with the language there. On page 51, under the school administration component for citizenship, the Virginia Department of Education has added the Profile Virginia Graduate. And under that is something called citizenship competencies. And so we integrated that language to align with our handbook. Similarly, for our parent rights and responsibilities, it currently was very dense. And so we tried to go through and make it more concise and mirror the newly adopted 2019 Virginia Board of Education model policy. We did a similar task on page 48 and 49. We took the language for student rights and responsibilities and we tried to consolidate that into one page for readability so that it would also mirror the new guidance from the Virginia Board of Education. We also look at handbooks and other school divisions surrounding us, so Newport News, Williamsburg, Hampton, and try to see if there's any information there that's applicable to our students here. And if there is, then we try to align our books in the region since our families talk with other families within our educational zone. For some substantial changes on page 4, under the counseling services component, there was language added there to show that we now have career coaches at our high schools and that they work with our school counselors to help students prepare for after high school experiences for either career or colleges. And so we had to add language there to explain what their role is. And we also had to add some language to talk about some of the work-based learning courses that now are available for students at our high school level. On page 8, there's a tentative addition. Again, this has not been finalized. Dr. Carroll will talk about this in his presentation later this evening. But since we are moving to a one-to-one device initiative, there was a recommendation that we do add a student fee of $50 into the handbook. But again, that is going to be contingent on board approval for this. Because we are switching to a one-to-one device initiative, there's some major changes that we do need to make to the AAUP policy. I had mentioned earlier, now that students are learning at home, we had to add some language to encompass their use of their devices at home. But now we also have to look at how do we revise and update some of the language to reflect the new model of teaching that we're using with the devices. So you will see some additional changes. I will have to bring this back to the board before the meeting on the 15th to share the new language, but we are in the process of editing that along with the county deputy attorney is working with us on that language as well. On page 37, there was a modification to the math, science, and technology magnet. Mrs. Denny, the principal over at Yorktown Elementary School, along with her staff, they tried to rewrite the language, not to change anything, but to make it more user-friendly and to provide some updates so that families can see some of the new components that they are using in that particular program. On page 43, there was some additional language we added for diploma seals. As you know, we started last year with the Early College Scholar Program, and so we had to make sure that the language there correlated with the criteria for those seals, particularly for those students who are in that program. On page 50, we added some information about the dress code for face coverings. And we added so that if we are in the state of a pandemic or a widespread illness, students would be allowed to wear protective face equipment or PPE. And so we had to provide some guidance for how that would look and the criteria for that. On pages 83 through 84, Dr. Vladu and his department provided information about the new updates to policy GB when it came to timelines for conducting an investigation into a complaint of harassment or discrimination. And so we had to mirror that in the handbook. So those timelines increased from 14 business days to 30 business days for them to conduct an investigation. And then it increased the time frame for the issuance of the division superintendent's written report from 5 to 10 business days. There's a companion policy on page 91 and 92, and that's policy GBA and JFHA, which affects students. And so we also had to make those updates to mirror the policy for GB. On page 98, every year parents are asked to sign off that they acknowledge that they received the handbook and reviewed it with their children. Because there's so much in the handbook that's important, Mrs. Parr led a team to try to break it out so that you'll notice on page 98 now, every specific part of the handbook that deals with students and expectations and behavior and conduct has been broken out. That includes bullying behavior, different things of that nature. So now parents will know exactly what page that information is on, and they can initial that they did have time to review that with their child. So I will stop now, since that was a great deal of information. I'll stop to see if there's any questions about anything from that previous part.
Dr. Butler, during the content, first of all, thank you for the organization of your presentation that helps to break it down. During the content, you said during the parent responsibility part, is there any mention of distance learning or pandemic or anything, just because the parents have had more responsibility during this time, just to cover in case there is more distance learning next year? Was the wording of that changed at all?
So there's a form, the AAUP form, that deals with instruction. So they're updating that form to mirror whatever language we put for the use of the internet and devices. So yes, that will be updated, and I'll make sure that when you get that information before the board approves, that that's included.
All right. And then my second question was with face masks. I know you put that in there for allowing the students to wear face masks. Would face masks and their appropriateness fall under dress code? I'm just thinking ahead.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. Now, the way that they do it in Virginia, under the Code of Virginia, when it comes to anything that adorns the person, so that's from hats, from masks, from suits, it's supposed to be included in your dress code. So that's the reason why we put it there. And it's not because it's a violation. It's just to make sure when you're wearing something to school that we give some guidelines and guidance so that students and families know what's allowed, and so that our staff know, you know, not to tell students to take it off. If we're in a pandemic, then they are allowed to wear certain coverings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one other question about that, Dr. Butler. How is that determined? It's you said a pandemic or a widespread disease or infection. Is that deigned by the use of the governor doing a state of emergency, or how?
Typically, we work with the Virginia Department of Health. And then we have our health services coordinator here, Alicia Hutchinson. She works in our department. She shares that information. If there is something that comes down from BDOE or the governor's office, it comes to our office. We talk, we make sure that we address it with Dr. Shandor and our chief officer, Dr. Carroll, and then we'll send out guidance to the schools. But you are correct. It's just not something that a school can on their own just decide to do it. It would be something that came from the division level and was disseminated down to the schools.
Thank you.
And Dr. Butler, I would assume it's covered under the dress code also for the types of material that people can make masks out of that may be disruptive if it's inappropriate pattern on the material. Is that addressed in there as well?
Yes, sir, because any type of display has to meet all the criteria, so like no promotion of drugs or alcohol, weapons, those type of things. That's all covered in the code. Yes, you can't have a mask that has a big marijuana leaf or anything like that on it, because that would not be in keeping with the code.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Graves, if he can bring the PowerPoint back. I have just a few more slides. The last portion of the presentation is to do with regulatory changes. One is on page 1 under attendance. Last year, we did some revisions to the attendance policy to match the Code of Virginia because there were some updates. This year, the General Assembly passed House Bill 308, which is guidelines for excused absence due to mental or behavioral health. So we already had excused absence for mental health, but now we have also added in the behavioral health component to mirror the new legislation. Going back to dress code, last year, Angie Siders, when she was in our department, she led a committee of parents and staff and students to look at our dress code and to make some changes to make sure that we were in compliance with Title IX. The General Assembly actually this year passed House Bill 837, which is called the Dress Code Equity Act, to make sure that one, that we were in compliance with Title IX across the Commonwealth, which we were already in compliance due to the work of that committee from last year. One of the things that we did not address last year was head coverings. And so that was the one thing we just added that same exact language from the code into our new handbook for dress code. On page 52, we added this last school year for bullying, cyberbullying reporting so that families and students would have an easy guide to be able to find out how to report bullying, to understand bullying behaviors and how it affects children. One of the things that we did modify this year is we added some additional information from the Board of Education's model policy and from the Virginia Tier System of Support to try to provide some additional supports for families when it came to the continuum between peer conflict and how to deal with that versus when it's bullying and how to report and handle those situations. On page 77, under student right to due process, there was some language that was addressed in the Virginia Administrative Code for how to question students when it came to school safety or discipline. And so we just made sure we mirrored that same language from that code so that when a school administrator does address a student and ask questions, there's a procedure put in place for those matters. There's a new page that's been added, and it's called Conflict Resolution and Restorative Conferencing Procedures. This is something that's coming from the Board of Education on how to reduce suspensions in school and how to address conflict between peers. When we looked at our student discipline data from last year, from both SWIS and also from the DCV, we noticed that many of the suspensions were due to peer conflict, either fighting or assault and battery. And so there are some nonviolent and peaceful manners that students can use. And so we tried to make sure we incorporated how our school counselors work with students, how our administrators can try to mediate and work with students as well. So all this information was laid out so that students know, like, if there's a conflict, this is how you can resolve it in a peaceful manner. And that if you fail to do so, then there are consequences that are in the code of conduct that we will have to apply in those situations. So that concludes my presentation on revisions and updates for the 2020-21 Student Handbook. I am available for any questions at this time.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Butler, for that presentation. I know it's always a daunting task to go through that entire book to make those changes. So thank you to you and your staff that did all that hard work. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
So next on our agenda, we have an update pertaining to special education program evaluation update. Dr. Shandor, I'll let you share.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And also thank you, Dr. Butler, for all of your work related to the conduct code. I know that's a lot of work. So next we have Dr. Elaine Gould, Special Education Director. If you recall back in February, I think it may have been either your first or second work session, at least our new school board members, we had the Gibson group come and report out on the evaluation related to our special education programs. So this evening, Dr. Gould is going to give you an update related to that evaluation. Dr. Gould.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Richardson, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor. Tonight, I will provide you with an update on the strategic plan goal number 2, objective 9. As you will recall, in 2018 and 2019, part of this past school year as well, Gibson Consulting completed a special education program evaluation of our current service delivery model for students with disabilities. The evaluation team came to the York County School Division and also conducted evaluations via phone. They included feedback from stakeholders, including teachers, both general and special education teachers, related service providers, our parents, division level leadership, and they identified opportunities for program improvement, for improving our programs and services for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. In this chart, you will see some of the action steps that we identified in the presentation to the board, to which Dr. Shandor just referred on February 10th. Many of the action steps that you'll see here were completed. However, the work of the special education program improvement team was delayed because of the school closures. The program improvement team was created, however, according to the timeline. It includes building administrators, division administrators, parents, special and general education teachers, related service providers. The team was slated to meet on March 17th, which you'll remember was the day after the schools closed, at least until the end of the school year. And what we were planning to do on that day was to look at the recommendations and the findings from the program evaluation, prioritize those, and develop a 3-year action plan. We also looked at, during the school closure, coming together virtually. However, given the priorities around instruction for the school division and lots of the new initiatives coming through, we determined that it would be best to wait until schools reconvene before the team would meet. Because the program improvement team did not convene as scheduled, I took that opportunity to look at the program findings and recommendations and found some of those that could be completed during the school closure without the work of the program improvement team. You'll see on the screen here that the areas included the evaluation recommendations around organization and management, as well as program implementation. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the parent insight and satisfaction. If you could please go back to the previous slide. Thank you. In the area of organization and management, Gibson Consultants recommended a reorganization of the Office of Student Services. So I'm currently working with the Chief Academic Officer on doing just that. We will we'll have that done by mid-June. That's coming up. So part of that is identifying coordinator and other related other student services personnel, identifying their roles and responsibilities around function. And what this does is it helps us to really focus on the academic and behavioral support that we need to be providing to schools, rather than so much heavier on the administrative roles and responsibilities like attending IEPs and evaluation meetings. Once the reorganization has occurred, we'll be required to update those job descriptions so they're very specific, related to their job responsibilities and any supervisory relationships that may change as a result of that. Work on the Student Services Handbook has actually been ongoing throughout this school year, and it references federal and state law, relevant board policies, as well as student services standard operating procedures. And we want to do that so we can provide guidance to our building administrators and to our teachers on how to implement special education programs, as well as to provide consistency among the student services staff. The handbook will be used to train our administrators and teachers throughout the division. Additionally, I'll be working with IT staff to regularly review and verify special education data and identify training needs around data entry. Before next year's budget, the FY22 budget, Student Services will establish targets for some of our related services staff where their caseloads are not mandated. So we'll be looking at that very closely to ensure optimal staff efficiency and effectiveness. In the area of program implementation, Student Services will be providing administrator training this summer for our new and veteran administrators. It's important for us to have all of them trained since we will be developing the new handbook. We'll also be providing the IEP bootcamp training for our special education teachers and assistant principals to establish standards for IEP development and ongoing monitoring throughout the school year using the tools that were provided by Gibson Consulting in the program evaluation. Next slide, please. So through surveys and interviews on the phone, and the evaluation team determined that our families are overall satisfied with the special education services in the area of IEP development, as well as the quality of student services received and the communication between the school and the families. However, there was one area where families felt like they needed additional support, and that was in the area of being connected with family, with community and VDOE events and resources that are available to them across the state and in our own region. And so in response to that, we started collecting information and we developed a Family Connections newsletter That newsletter was actually slated for dissemination on March 17th as well. But unfortunately, with the school closure, many of those events were canceled or postponed, turned into virtual events. And so recently we've been getting some additional information about some events that are available to families during the school closure. And so we sent out our first issue on May 22nd to families, our first Family Connections newsletter, and that will continue monthly. We will also partner with VCU's Center for Family Involvement to provide the VDOE's critical decision points for families of children with disabilities training. That training is scheduled to take place on August 15th. However, if we continue to experience restrictions around events and school opening, we will plan to postpone that until October. So it'll likely be a virtual event if we do it. Finally, the program evaluators recommended the implementation of a social emotional learning initiative. Had we not closed the schools, we would likely be leaving this to evaluation and recommendation from our special education program improvement team. However, given our current situation with this prolonged school closure and the impact that we know that it's having on our families, we felt that it was necessary to provide some immediate attention to this. Work has begun with Ms. Gerald's, YCSD's mental health professionals, the behavior support specialists, and school administration to begin looking at how we can support our families, our teachers, and our students when they return to school and actually while they're away as well. It will begin on the evening of June 3rd. Our lead counselor has worked with Ms. Gerald's to hold a focus group with the Secretary of Education, Carney, related to the topic of mental health. We will certainly continue to provide you with updates around this initiative. So that concludes my presentation for the updates for the special education program evaluation. I'm happy now to take your comments and any questions you may have.
Dr. Gould, it's Sean Myatt. Hey, greatly appreciate you moving forward without the improvement team despite the COVID-19 impact. You hit a lot of the evaluation areas, some of the key recommendations. I wanted to focus a little bit about one of the most significant recommendations on organization. Can you give us a little bit more detail? You're going to functionally organize. I know there were some key services with regard to compliance and data collection that needed focus. I know we don't have the org chart in front of us. And one other quick question: do you expect to be organized by June the 15th in that new design, or you've just identified and are moving in that direction? Thanks.
So I'll start with your second question. So we will be organized. That plan will have been developed. To answer your first question, we really are looking at organizing around some of our coordinators being instructionally focused. So we have initiative, we have a behavior support specialist. We have a very strong movement in the direction of serving our students with autism in the division. We have an evidence-based practices academy. We have identified ways in which to sustain that. And so that might be one area of focus for one of our coordinators. So I'm really looking at organizing some of them around instruction and then some of them around the compliance, handling compliance training, attending initial eligibility meetings. We've moved away from attending reevaluation meetings last year, and we trained our building administrators to facilitate those meetings. However, moving forward, we'll be looking at both those administrators and our school psychologists looking at the facilitating those reevaluation meetings. So just very focused on how can we be more instructionally supportive to our buildings and our teachers to support our students with disabilities in both general education and then in our special programs as well.
One other quick question. Do you have to add any new staff, or do you envision using existing staff and just reorganizing? And then the next question on that would be, how do we look from a staffing standpoint as we enter into summer and begin to prepare for the next school year overall? on the student services side?
So we are currently, as far as any of those caseloads that are mandated, we are within those mandates. The board approved 4 new special education teachers. Our special programs are growing, and so we have, we're moving towards hiring those teachers currently. As far as our speech language pathologists, we are within those caseloads. However, we will be looking at some of the other areas. So to answer your question, we don't have to hire any new staff now with outside of those 4 new teachers. We sometimes shift personnel from building to building. If we notice that the caseloads in one building are low and the other ones are higher, we do some shifting of personnel that way.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's more of a comment than a question. We had an organizational call today just to get ready for our call with Secretary Carney. And I just want to give you kudos for the amazing staff that was on that call. I know Ms. Gaylord organized them, but I walked away feeling like these people are in it for the right reasons. They really want what's best for our kids, and they're willing to just be organized and ready to have this call and just make it known, what we're experiencing in York County with our kids. So just kudos to you and your team.
Thank you. They are ready.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Gould, for that presentation, and thank you, Ms. Geralds, for leading the way on that meeting with Secretary Carney and exploring to make sure our students are ready in the mental health area when they go back to school. It's good to have a board member representing that so they can come back and report to the board on what's going on if we can't.
My pleasure.
So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so our next presentation is gifted evaluation update. Dr. Shandor, I'll let you share comments on that.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Again, Elaine, Dr. Gould, I appreciate all the work that you've put in with combing through that evaluation and working with your team related to those recommendations. Our next presentation is going to be Ms. Christina Head, Associate Director of K-12 Academic Services. She's going to provide you with an update on the evaluation of the gifted program. So board members, this was something that occurred, I believe, before your tenure on the board in January. So we presented to previous board members, Mr. Richardson and Mr. Higginbotham. I think you'll be familiar with a lot of this information. Ms. Head has structured her presentation so that she could provide a little bit of background in the beginning of that presentation. So I'll turn that over to Ms. Head. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Richardson and members of the board and Dr. Shandor. Yes, tonight I provide you with an update on the completed actions and the next steps in regards to those recommendations from the gifted program evaluation. Last school year, our division participated in an external gifted program evaluation, and I provided the board with an overview presentation of that evaluation report. And so a copy of this evaluation and the video from that report can be found in board docs under the June 3rd, 2019 meeting. And this report was broken down into these 6 main areas that you can see on this screen here. So tonight, I'm going to provide you with a brief update on the work we've completed in each of these areas. But it's important to note that the evaluation's recommendations were very specific, and some of these will take multiple years to fully accomplish. So I'm going to begin in the area of curriculum and instruction. On the left side, you can see the evaluation report's recommendations that I shared in that previous presentation. I included this information in all 6 components tonight, since 3 of our current board members were not on the board when this information was shared and presented last year. And because they were previously shared, I will not go into detail on each recommendation this evening. However, if you have any questions, just feel free to stop and ask as I move through the presentation. And then you can see on the right side, examples of action steps this year and some next steps. And as I talk about these, I'll highlight the evaluation's recommendation as it aligns on the left side. So to meet the gifted needs in the general education setting, our Extend teachers went to most of the elementary schools, and they provided the teachers with individual and large group staff development training on how to differentiate instruction for our high ability and gifted students. They gave them resources and helped them with lesson planning and they offered them sets of books that included some great question stems that are increasingly rigorous. And our principals gave us feedback about this training, stating they were really able to see evidence of these efforts in the classroom instruction. So in regards to the recommendation to develop a clear scope and sequence of the gifted units, our gifted team worked with a gifted expert to align the gifted units so that there's a sequence of skill development within and across each grade level. And in the coming year, our team will work to connect the gifted curriculum to the core classroom curriculum at each grade level. And this year we were purposeful in finding ways that our gifted teachers could collaborate and co-teach with our gifted cluster classroom staff. So for example, we identified times during the day and the month when our gifted teachers had availability. And then schools were given those times so that they could arrange collaboration and co-teaching sessions. And then next year, we're going to develop a year-long calendar with specific site-based days for each of the 10 elementary schools. And our Extend teachers will provide professional development by modeling co-teaching strategies in the classroom. And this in turn will help strengthen the gifted instruction at the home school setting. So this slide focuses on the recommendations and updates in the area of professional development. And as I mentioned before, we brought in that gifted expert from Virginia Beach, and multiple times she worked directly with our Extend teachers on updating their curriculum. And the teachers were able to email her throughout the year to get more guidance and feedback as they worked through those revisions. And next year, we'll continue to work to help these teachers to learn to connect and relate their instruction to the regular classroom instruction. And we also plan to provide the Extend teachers some co-teaching training, similar to the model and strategies that are used by our special ed teachers and our English language teachers. At the start of the school year, gifted cluster teachers met with the gifted teachers at the Extend Center to learn specific needs of our gifted learners. And so the teachers, the classroom teachers, were able to see firsthand where their students go each week and what they learn there. And they said that this was very insightful. And so we really want to be sure to continue that practice. And this past winter, our gifted cluster teachers and their Extend staff completed a 2-day junior gradebook training together, in which they learned the shared inquiry method of teaching for high ability learners. And so this training will also occur yearly. And next year, we do plan to provide additional training on the characteristics of gifted students as it relates to underrepresented students. And so having a new online platform for professional development will assist us with providing that training next school year. And we'll also gather a group of school counselors and administrators for a committee to look specifically at ways that we can identify students in underrepresented student groups. So this slide highlights the recommendations and updates in the area of communication. So to improve communication, our Extend teachers implemented a weekly newsletter email that they sent to parents, and it provided weekly details on the current unit of study and the activities that were completed at the Extend Center that week. And this newsletter also had website links and on related topics, and also some book suggestions. And the Extend teachers also provided a monthly newsletter to our gifted cluster teachers as well as our principals. And this newsletter also included links on instructional strategies and resources and lessons that the teachers could utilize in classroom with all students. In addition, the Extend Center webpage was revised this year. We added new grade level links to provide descriptions to those Extend units of study, and also the links to those weekly newsletters. So for example, if a third grade teacher, gifted cluster teacher, wanted to find out what his or her student learned about in the Extend Center that week, they can now click the third grade link on the Extend webpage, and there he or she will find the week's newsletter and also the unit that they're studying in the description. So this slide highlights the recommendations and updates in the area of identification. So this is the second year that the division administered the INAT gifted screener to all first graders. While this new screener has helped increase the number of students that were referred to gifted testing, it has not so far increased the number of students found eligible. So in the coming year, we plan to gather a committee to address some of these identification recommendations and also possibly explore using a different screener such as the COGAT. And additionally, the team will investigate the suggested benchmarking ideas for our Title I schools. As a division, we know that we have much more work to do in the area of identification. So in the coming year, we'll continue to monitor the number of students that are found eligible for the gifted program. We'll also examine our identification process and revise criteria to identify students, and also collaborate with other school divisions who are making progress in this area. So it is my goal that by the end of next year, we will make a recommendation for revisions in our identification process in order to identify more students and increase the identification of underrepresented student populations. So the last area I want to update you on is the area of service delivery model. The evaluation recommended that the school division provide guidelines for assignments of our gifted cluster teachers and classrooms in order to help consistency among the elementary schools. So this year, our division's gifted coordinator provided our school administrators with guidance on selecting the gifted cluster classroom teachers for next year, as well as best practices on clustering the gifted students in classrooms. And this training will help ensure that there's consistency in staff for our gifted students. In an effort to reduce travel time and provide our gifted students with a longer instructional day, the division began offering our gifted services for both Waller Mill and Magruder students at Waller Mill Elementary School. Feedback from our parents and the staff has been very positive, so we will plan to continue this next school year. The program evaluation report highly encouraged that the school division identify ways in which the gifted students can receive their services in the homeschool setting. And knowing this would be a significant change for our students and families, the school division created a committee to examine gifted service models and how we can maximize our gifted services for our elementary students. So this next slide will provide details on the committee and their work. The Gifted Service Model Committee is comprised of representation from all 10 elementary schools. So members include parent representatives, gifted cluster teachers, administrators, the Extend coordinator, our lead school counselor, the GIAC chair and vice chair, myself, and the director of elementary instruction. And the committee met monthly from October until March. And we really took time to develop an understanding of gifted instruction and learn about gifted service models. And we also provided our members with current national research and articles about different gifted models, and also the best practices for gifted instruction, so they could really see what was out there for gifted services at a national level, and we discussed the benefits of each. And the committees explored gifted service delivery options that are being used by the surrounding school divisions as a way to see some variety of service models. And a group of our committee members observed in gifted instruction in our gifted cluster classrooms here in YCSD. And they also observed instruction in all of the Extend Center classrooms. And committee members also visited a gifted program in a surrounding neighboring school division. And that gifted program director there guided us through some classrooms at different levels. And we were able to really see gifted instruction within the home school and ask questions to the teachers and administrators. And while our time for this committee was cut short this year, we will continue this important work of this gifted service delivery model committee during the next school year. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide you with a brief update on the gifted evaluation program report. Available for any questions you may have.
Just a couple comments, Ms. Head. I'm glad to hear there's positive feedback about that transportation issue. That was something that was just so logical, it just made sense. We had students that were taking over an hour out of their day just for transportation. So it's all about the students here. So that was, I'm glad to hear that has been positive. And I know that one of the biggest things is the identification process. That's something that you've been looking at. And I know we started this process like a year, 2 years ago, with deciding we would evaluate the program. How long had it been since this program had been reevaluated?
So prior to this external program evaluation, it had been over 20 years since
Okay.
the program had been evaluated.
I thought that was the number. I just wanted to make sure. And it's just important for everybody to know that we didn't just, on a whim. We're not trying to change anything. If everything was running great, then it'd be status quo. But this is from the experts that made these suggestions, and we're moving forward with some of them, and it's good to hear they're positive. So thank you.
Just one other minor comment. You're right. These major adjusts seem to be programmed across years. I would just offer, and this applies not only to this evaluation, but the special education evaluation, that we go ahead and ensure that we're prepared for any contingency, particularly as the new school year starts, and that we formulate the approach and workaround so that we can continue to maintain the momentum in this fine work. And it looks like, Ms. Head, you're doing that. But you may have to break down into additional working groups, whatever it may be. But we've got to be able to continue this, and despite being perhaps virtual or in a blended situation. But again, I would please ensure that that's part of the planning and approach as we enter the new school year. And thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Head, again for that presentation. That was a great detailed presentation there. So next update is on the one-to-one initiative. Dr. Shandor, I'll let you take over from here.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. So now we're going to have Dr. Carroll, our Chief Operations Officer, provide an update related to the one-on-one initiative. If you recall, we have brought this topic to the last several meetings. We've had conversations in 2-on-2 or one-on-2 format. So we're trying to provide as much information as possible. Dr. Carroll has led 2 major committees over, other than the fire, which would have been his 3rd major committee, but 2 major committees within the last few months since March, the one-on-one initiative committee, as well as the reopening committee. So he's done a lot of work, and there's a lot of different folks on our teams. Ms. Head, who just gave you the presentation on the gifted program, and Dr. Gould, they're also in a number of these committees. So there's a lot of work going on in the division. So Dr. Carroll this evening is going to share a little bit of information with you about the one-on-one initiative, sort of a reminder of where we were. And then if you remember at the last meeting, we provided some information that were in draft form. So we've asked Mr. Bone to sharpen his pencil a little bit as we move forward. So I'll let Dr. Carroll share his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor, Chairman Richardson, members of the board. So as Dr. Shandor said, here's a update on where we have been and where we're going. And some of this will look familiar, but it's also, we want to give you a little more finer detail, both on budget and the actions we've been taking. So as you know, we are basing our work on research. Our why has been established by the fact that we know that there's a possibility that we will be in a blended situation, or if context gets so bad, return to what we're doing now, which we hope will not be the case. We do know from some emails that we've received in response to the recent survey that we're going to have to do some additional work in establishing that why with some of our families, so that they understand that this is the only way that we see that if we are in a blended situation where we can do what's right by the students, deliver new instruction and effective instruction during that time period. So I won't belabor some of these points. You know that we've established a framework and that we continue to work on our draft budget. We are committed to using about 3,500 of our current units so that we're good stewards of the money that has already been expended. And that will be for the early grades of kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, We do have a good number of units to cover that, but we want to make sure that we use the Chromebooks that we purchased new this past spring and or winter, and also that we make sure we utilize the iPads that we have in inventory, but we'll need to add to them. We're currently verifying the quality of the device for the upper grades, and in fact, we signed off on that late today. The Dell 3190 looks to be a fine unit that can handle the Windows-based operations, and so that's the one we're going to be going with there. And we'll be advertising that and letting our families know as we get a little farther down the road, all the devices and the minimum specifications, so that if our families want to provide their own, that they can match that. We also, I think, shared with you last time that we'd be administering a home survey, talking about device planning, but more importantly, what is our access levels with each individual student. This survey was not something just to gather numbers quantitatively. Qualitatively, we wanted to know the access of every single current home, whether they're planning to return or not for next year, and what that status is, so that we can work on mitigating those situations where some homes don't have access to the internet. We launched that survey late last week. The deadline for finishing it is tomorrow night, and at present, we have over 6,300 of our about 12,000 students that have gotten answers for that. And we will be having staff starting either the 3rd or the 4th this week, following up with anybody who did not answer, so that we can make sure that we have this solid, dependable, qualitative data here. So let's look again at the budget. This is still a draft as we continue to sharpen things up, but as Mr. Bowen said earlier, we are using a lot of one-time restricted funds. The CARES funding that is coming from York County, the impact aid funds that I referred to in a previous report as the revenue stabilization funds. We're referring to the same funds here, but they actually never made it to the revenue stabilization fund, as that's a process that goes through the county. So we're going to capture those as the impact aid funds. Same money still going to our purposes here. And you know that we talked about anticipating some FY20 end of year funds to about $1 million. And in order to make some of these iPad purchases work, you heard Mr. Bowen earlier talk about using some FY20 funds that are dedicated to technology. We're anticipating about $2 million coming from student technology funds, and then over the next 4 years, moving or using a great majority of those funds towards devices, and that'll add up to about $1.8 million, making this the total funds available to us of $8.5 million. Now, I would say, if we could stay on that slide, I would like to emphasize here. I know there's discussion about the fact that we in this current situation are not able to give additional compensation to any of our staff for next year. And I want to point out that when you look at all of these funds, they are either dedicated for technology only, or they are funds that we use on a one-time basis. And so this says these are not funds that we would be using for compensation. So I wanted to highlight that because I know that's of interest and important to understand that sometimes certain funds are dedicated for certain areas, like our capital funding would not be used for compensation. So now we can go and you remember the last presentation, I had put all the costs on one slide, but now that we're getting some additional data here and the definition, I wanted to break the expenses into one other slide. And so the new device cost is going to be around $5.5 million. The infrastructure costs, which I've shared with you before, are $1 and $1.2 million respectively in FY1 21 and 22. Those are servers and storage type of expenses. We do have a lease purchase cost at about $100,000. Now, that's the best price we've gotten to date. There still may be better pricing there, so that number will only come down. And then that leaves out of those, all of those expenses leaves about $700,000 that we will reserve for any related costs that we still haven't identified or put a cost to. And, you know, it's just, we're moving so fast in this that this is something that, you know, divisions usually take 3 to 5 years. We want to make sure that we have some buffer to make sure that we allow for any margin of error. And so at this point, we will move to the next slide. I'll invite Mr. Bowen in to give you a little more detail, and then I'll return with next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. Mr. Richardson, members of the board, Dr. Shander, I just wanted to give you an update on the draft financing plan for the one-to-one initiative. As Dr. Carroll mentioned, he reviewed most of these funds with us. I'll just highlight what the intent is. As we were initially considering the one-to-one initiative, we were thinking we were going to finance the majority of the initiative and the purchase, and we would just pay a higher debt service over the term of the 4 years. However, in consulting with our partners at the county, and we agreed that it was best to use some of this upfront one-time money and pay down that debt service. So let me walk through real quick. So for FY20, we have anticipated end-of-year funds of $1 million. That won't be spent initially. That will go into the technology reserve fund to give us some cushion and to help pay the debt service and the expenses in 21, 22, and beyond. The impact aid, we're going to use $2 million of the impact aid, and $200,000 will go into the tech reserve fund. And so $2 million of that impact aid we'll use to pay down the initial purchase. We'll also use the $1 million from the county for the CARES Act funding to pay down the initial purchase. They actually have a requirement with their funding that their CARES Act funding has to be spent by December 31st. So we need to spend that. So we'll take care of that. And then with the use of the state technology grant from this year, that's available to use, and we'll go ahead and pay that debt service down. So of the total revenue of $4.7 million that we have right now, 3.5 will be used to pay down the initial purchase. And then going back up to the revenue line, we have the state technology grant of $450,000. Our actual state technology grant is $544,000. So we're saving almost $100,000 in reserve because, as Dr. Carroll mentioned, we're using a lot of existing devices that are in inventory. So there'll need to be some funding available to replace those devices. We just don't know because some of it was purchased this year, some of it was purchased 3 years ago. So there'll be some staggered cost over the years when we'll need to replace those. So we're not showing that replacement cost in here, but we do have funds in reserve from the state technology grant to cover some of that. And Dr. Carroll mentioned the student fees, $500,000 is what we're anticipating over the 4-year term. And then we get to the lease purchase. We're borrowing $2 million. It's a 4-year term. It's just under $100,000 is what the lease costs are. So that comes to $2,095,000. And then we have some infrastructure costs, $1 million in 2021 and $1.2 million in 2022. As I mentioned in the procurement resolution, we're extending the warranty of $60,000, and we're going to continue to study to see if some of those storage, the minimal storage units could be eliminated. So if that's the case, then we can reduce $600,000 of that $1 million cost in 2021. So that's something that we'll continue to assess. That $1 million in 2021 is not a given, but we certainly want to show it as a placeholder. It's actually, the infrastructure is really not tied to the one-to-one initiative. However, we've never had a line item specifically for the infrastructure. It's always been a collection of funds over many years because these are things that we replace every 5 to 7 years. So what we typically do is we'll save up the state technology grant for 3-4 years, and then we'll use the combination of end-of-year funds that we'll ask the county to reappropriate, and we'll dedicate that for for technology so we can make those large purchases. So we're actually now being able to add those large purchases into a dedicated funding stream. And the last thing that doesn't show on the chart, this is any budgetary actions that the board takes over the next 4 to 5 years, dedicating more funding in the operating budget to technology, or the use of end of year dollars. So we historically have a fund balance at the end of year between 600,000 and 900,000. So we've always carved out some of that money for technology. That's not showing on here. I didn't want to show it on here because I'm not sure what's happening in 2021, and I don't want to give a false impression that we're going to have money in 2021 to dedicate to it. But certainly in the out years, we certainly expect that there will be some funding available from end of year. Any questions on the financing plan?
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's clear for me and anyone who might be, watching at home, that this 8.5 million is over the course of 5 years. It's just sort of front loaded here at the beginning with the close to 5 million cost for the devices and to get everything running, correct?
Correct.
And I would add that as Mr. Bowen said earlier, that 2.2 million of that cost is something we'd be spending anyway. We just formalized it in this plan to make sure that we have it covered.
Okay.
My question might be two parts, so both of you can answer it. Nowhere in the financial part or any of this is there anything about help desk or tech support. And I guess my question is, do our folks in-house have the capacity to handle what's coming? And if not, is that going to be a financial piece for us as well that we need to be thinking about?
I can speak to the tech support piece. We currently have had to have our help desk servicing the entire division with people calling in students on top of staff. They're usually used to staff only, and they've been able to handle the volume of calls. That will be something we'll have to evaluate as we get into that realm. We also anticipate having to hire some technology. We're still trying to identify what they would be, but the current thinking is somebody with some limited technology experience, but would able to handle the taking in of ones that are broken and processing them for sending them to the factories for break fix.
And so I will add to that in the final budget, if you recall, I set aside $100,000 for technology, not knowing it was kind of a budget balancing number, but thinking that we would need additional staffing for that. So there is some funding there, 100,000. It's not a lot. It might get us to, tech, very, very low paid tech people to do, as Dr. Carroll mentioned. So this may be something we may have to suffer through the first year and then look to adding during the next budget cycle.
Thank you.
Very good question, though, and something that is on our minds.
One last quick comment. I suspect there are other funding streams out there, particularly from a grant standpoint. And I know that we've had success before, but I would just offer that we continue to look for those other funding streams, particularly on the grant side, in the out years.
Yes, and I want you to know that we investigated the federal grants that we currently have, and we were unable to clear any funds out of Title I or Title III, but that was something we investigated. If there's no other questions, we'll move on to the next slide. And you'll see the next steps. So we'll be following up on that survey, as I said, starting on the 3rd to make sure that we get good data from each of our families. We are in the final stages of negotiating terms on devices and on financing. We're working on, of course, coordinating our messaging to parents and the timing of that, creating a one-to-one student handbook so all facets of the program are covered. We are already training our teachers on using the Canvas learning platform. And remember that we're going to have kind of a soft opening with summer school, and that planning is already underway. We'll also have to create a website so that people can have a convenient way to check on the facets of our program. And also, as new families move into the area would be able to pick up that information quick and easily. And then last, the deployment planning, which part of the cost of the devices has a factor in there for a deployment company, a third party to come in and do that. We're talking about over 10,000 devices that will be delivered at some point in August. And you have to have a staff that is used to doing that and putting enough bodies on the job. And so we'll be hiring that third party to do that. So that's part of the device cost. And I would just add for the board and for the public to understand that this is a very big lift, as we say, and this is going to be a complicated thing, not only just to get the devices off the ground, but also to get our teachers up to speed with teaching this way. I mean, they've had some experience with it, secondary especially, but elementary will be shifting from review to new information. And so this is going to present to us an awful lot of challenges, and we are maybe under a shifting context. So we're going to bump our elbows and scrape our knees on this. This is going to be there are going to be times where we have troubles with this, but just know that our staff is going to give its level best to do the best job we can on this. And I'm happy to take any other questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. Board members, if I could just add one comment. Dr. Carroll, I appreciate all your work. Mr. Bowen as well, with the planning involved with the one-to-one initiative. Board members, I just want to remind you in Friday notes, we did send you our plans related to Canvas training. It was a lengthy document that Ms. Skinner included, and we also included our summer school plan. And if you scroll through there at the very end, there's a list of questions there that we're looking at gaining information and figuring out this experience this summer. So I would encourage each of you, you probably already have, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to go in and take a look at those documents.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Shandor. And thank you, Dr. Carroll, for that presentation. And Mr. Bowen, I know it's been a daunting task trying to push all of this through, and with things changing daily. I think I've mentioned that 50 times already, but we really do appreciate all your work, because it does literally change by the minute sometimes. So thank you for that work. And our last topic this evening relates to graduation. Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Board members, as you know, we are moving forward with our graduation ceremonies coming up here in, I believe, 2 weeks on, I think it's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, but I'm going to bring back Dr. Aaron Butler to the screen, and he is going to share a little more information with you related to graduation. And then feel free to ask any questions, or we can move into discussion. Dr. Butler.
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Again, it is unfortunate that we won't be able to go our normal route, but I'm excited to announce that the committee has been working hard. And so for graduation this year, York River Academy is going to be on Wednesday, June the 10th, and that'll be at 6:00 p.m. over at Bailey Field parking lot. We'll have a stage set up for them, as well as audio visual. We'll also have some, the faculty will be staying in their cars, and so will the students, but we're doing the drive-in commencement ceremony for York River Academy, and Mr. Walt Cross is looking forward to that with his students and families. For our other 4 high schools, Bruton High School will actually be at Bruton High School, and that will be on Thursday, June the 11th, starting at 9:00 a.m. And they'll be utilizing their student parking lot, and we'll have the similar thing with a stage. There'll be a video wall for families to see, as well as recording. York County Video Services is working with us to make sure that occurs for them. And then York High School will be that evening, June the 11th at 6:00 p.m. at Bailey Field parking lot, with a similar format, with a stage and with a video wall and with audio visual support. And then Grafton High School is on Friday the 12th at 9:00 a.m. And then Tabb High School will be Friday the 12th at 6:00 p.m., both at Bailey Field. And so we're working on the logistics. I know that Catherine Goff from our PR department has sent out communication to families, just with some specifics about the number of vehicles that families can have. We have one car for this graduating senior and their immediate family, and then they get a placard for another guest car. Because of the regulations from the state, There won't be anybody on the stage per se. We'll have the stage set up and you'll have the principal there, and then we'll have guests sitting next to the stage in tents.
Right. And I think the board, we should have a short discussion about our attendance there because of the restrictions in one tent set up to try to social distance under a tent 6 feet. I think we're going to be limited to the amount of board members. So I'm going to make a suggestion. First of all, I think the board members that the districts they represent, that the majority of their students go to, they should attend those graduations at a minimum. Is that an agreement? Mark or Mr. Schaefer, I'm sorry, at Bruton and at Tab, Mr. Myatt, Ms. Geraltz at York, and Brett Higginbotham at Grafton.
Yeah, makes great sense.
And I can do YRA. I've done YRA every year since I've been on the board, so I'll do that for that. Now, board members, because there's new board members, I'm not opposed to, not attending all the graduations. So if there's somebody that wanted to attend all the graduations and be the second person at all these, or if we want to mix it up, I'm good with that. I can attend whichever one that other board members can. I'm pretty flexible those days. I've set them off to the side so I can do that. What do you think? Any suggestions from the board on how you want to do that, or?
So are we saying that you can't have 2 school board members there, or
No, we can have at least 2. We could probably, if we do 3, we're going to have Dr. Shandor there, and that'll be 4 people under a small 8x8 or 10x10. It'll be pretty tight. Oh, the other suggestion I was going to make, normally we would wear coat and tie, but since this is an outside event, I'm going to suggest business casual. And even Mr. Schaefer, I think, had a request from his district to wear a particular T-shirt. They've asked him to wear. So it's going to be hot, possibly. I mean, we're talking about the 90s this week and maybe even next week. The humidity in Virginia, we all know how that is. I just want people to be comfortable there as well. The graduates will be sitting in air-conditioned cars, hopefully, and, popping out, doing across the stage, and then, getting back in. But I just don't want individuals to be uncomfortable or get overheated at the event. So is business casual acceptable to everyone, or?
Definitely.
Yep, fine with me.
Okay.
And
Good.
Mr. Richardson, I would love to attend YRA with you if that's possible.
Yes, absolutely. So I got 2 of us down for YRA. At Bruton, I don't mind going up to Bruton with Mark the next morning, unless someone else wanted to go.
Nope, and I can head over to Grafton if you like. I just have to look at the schedule, that's all.
All right, we're going to put you with Grafton. So we have
York is on the same day as Bruton, right?
Bruton, June 11th. Yes, June 11th. It's just that evening, correct?
I'll go with Laura over to York.
All right. And does anyone want to go with Mr. Myatt at Tab?
I can do that.
Okay.
Thanks, Brett. I need a greeter at the entrance to the parking lot.
I can wait.
Honk if you're proud.
So just to go over the what we have so far, logistics to make sure we're good. Myself and Ms. Geraltz at YRA on Wednesday, June the 10th. Myself and Mr. Schaefer at Bruton on Thursday, June the 11th. That's a 9 a.m. graduation up there. And then Mr. Myatt and Mr. Higginbotham at Tab on Friday, 6 p.m. June 12th. And on June 11th, York High School, Ms. Geraltz and Mr. Schaefer. That's at 6 p.m. And then Friday, 9 a.m. Grafton, we have Mr. Higginbotham, Mr. Myatt. Does that work well for everybody? That kind of splits it up for everyone, and we're not, we're complying with the social distancing, and we still get to, send as many board members as we can, safely do to the graduation.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Any other questions about graduation? I'll check with the parking, or I'll get Ms. Goff to send something out about parking for York High School and then for Bruton, just so we know where to go to for the board members, the best place to enter and to park. Other than that, I think that should have covered most of it. But if there's additional questions, just email me or call me or Dr. Shandor, and we'll get it coordinated for you.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Butler.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Butler, for all that information. I know the committee did a lot of hard work on that as well. So we have all that done. So that was our final presentation for the evening, and I appreciate all the information provided by all the presenters tonight. A lot of hard work has went into all that. So our next virtual meeting, special meeting, will be held Monday, June the 15th. We scheduled it then because it would be after graduation, and we'd be able to sit down and have that meeting at 5 p.m. and just a few more school days left, and reflect on your goals and stay focused on the positives, and everybody have a great week. And we are now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.